Today, the Australia Post plot thickens. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined by Robbie Barwick from the Citizens Party. Hi Robbie.
Hi Martin.
How are you going?
Yeah, good.
Well,
the plot definitely
thickens.
does thicken.
Absolutely,
Yep.
yeah. The more you turn over stones, the more things climb out from underneath them.
No, for sure. So I'm hoping there's plenty of people watching this that have been watching all along and keeping up to date with the developments, and hoping also that plenty of new people see this and get involved, because we've reached a point in the campaign we've been waging about Australia Post, where we now have an inquiry that's underway. Submissions closed a week or so ago. There will be a hearing in a few weeks in Canberra, and that's when it's real, fireworks are going to happen at that hearing. That's when a lot of the truth will come out. So what we can do is just think in terms of putting maximum pressure on the process from the outside to make sure the senators do the right thing on the inside, right? And so that's actually why we're having this discussion today. We've launched a new petition I'll talk about in a minute, where that people can get behind. It's a change. We do multiple petitions for different things. This one's a change.org petition, which is purely so it can be as viral as possible and go as wide as possible. And every time someone signs it, it'll send a message to Scott Morrison, right? And that's very valuable at this time. So we just want it to go viral in the next couple of weeks. So by the time they have that hearing, people can, the senators will really be feeling the spotlight is on them, and that's crucial, because it's up to them. They're going to have a lot of evidence presented to them, and it's up to them to make sure they do justice with it. And it's up to us to keep the pressure on, so they're motivated to do that. That's how politics works.
Absolutely. And the Senate estimates last week actually cast a further spotlight on things and showed further deficiencies within the whole discussion around Australia Post.
Have you lifted anything from it anyway?
It's not
Some
really
of the findings?
appropriate for anybody from Australia Post to speak to the contents of that report.
I'm
So
asking an
depends.
independent agency, Minister,
Yes.
a question.
But the report is the property of the shareholder departments, not Australia
I'm not
Post.
asking
So it's
for the
inappropriate
report.
for
I'm
all
not
the
asking for
employees
the
of Australia
report.
Post to speak
I'm
to
not
its
asking
contents.
for the report, Minister. I'm asking an independent agency if there were any helpful suggestions in a document they may have read in February that they've chosen to implement in their organisation. So did the draft report you see, when you mentioned automation, suggest cutting jobs, cutting services, divesting your parcels section?
I don't believe it's appropriate for me to comment on a report for government. I think government has claimed a public immunity claim on that report. I don't think it's appropriate that I comment on that.
So you can't tell the Senate whether the draft review that you looked at suggested cutting jobs, services or divesting of your parcels division?
So Senator Mackenzie,
I've got
Mr.
one
Boyce
more
has
question.
highlighted the fact that a claim was made and accepted by the committee. So please continue.
The press release from the shareholder ministers says this report was to inform the incoming chair. This is the 1st of November 2019. Now we're now 15 months down the track, and you're unable to use this report to inform your corporate plan 2023, which is actually why the shareholder ministers commissioned this report. Is that the case?
Well, to the extent that we haven't received any final report, that's true. We were able to benefit, however, in our ongoing discussion and dialogue while BCG was undertaking that review, gleaming as they sought information from us, we were able to glean information from them, primarily about benchmarking against what other postal services were doing around the world, and that certainly has been an input for us of value.
But it hasn't been able to...
But we've not seen the final report, so no.
And so my question again goes to this review's recommendations and findings have been unable to inform you as incoming chair, 15 months ago, or the corporate plan as it was supposed to have done.
Well, Senator, I think...
I'm asking the chair... I'm asking the chair,
considering it was the
Mr.
government that commissioned the report, surely the government should respond?
I'm very happy to table the media release which said why the report was actually commissioned 15 months ago. It was to inform the Chair of Australia Post and to inform the corporate plan for Australia Post 2023.
Well,
it is now March 2021.
The review was designed
the Chair's
for
evidence
by government
is that the
context
final...
of assessing
Senator Mackenzie,
strategies to deal with the
Senator
changes in
Mackenzie
business
and Minister,
consumer needs.
you will be silent. Talking over each other is unedifying and does not actually enhance the reputation of the Senate. Minister, please answer.
Thank you. So the review was designed for consideration by government in the context of assessing Australia Post strategies to deal with the changes in business and consumer needs, demand services and impact of long-term changes to the way that Australians use e-commerce and operating challenges. The report is the property of the shareholder departments, not Australia Post, and therefore it's inappropriate for Australia Post employees to speak to its contents.
Senator Mackenzie, you have the
As
floor.
my questions were not asking the Chair to speak to its contents about how this report was... Its intent was to inform the corporate plan. Because the government is refusing to release it, it is unable to do its perfunctory why it was actually commissioned in the first place.
You saw a few extraordinary things in there. And one of them is the footage of the chairman of Australia Post being questioned specifically about what happened to Christine Holgate. And you could see everything about his body language screamed pressure. Right, he was squirming under that questioning. He was flustered. He was getting his dates wrong, and it showed you that this is where the monkey sleeps in the issue, and that's what's going to come out in the hearings. Now, he hasn't seen the submission made by Christine Holgate to the inquiry yet. He hadn't as of the time when he gave those answers. So he's still trying to stick with the line that she resigned and and that she volunteered to stand aside originally and then she resigned. So he's going to have a lot to answer for in the hearings proper, right? So that was one of it. That was one of the things that came out of that hearing. The other thing is in a sense better politically because it shows you there's big developments behind the scenes. There's a real split developing between the National Party and the Liberal Party over this. And that was on display in that hearing because Senator Bridget Mackenzie of the National Party came to blows repeatedly with Senator Jane Hume of the Liberal Party, who every time Bridget Mackenzie asked about the Boston Consulting Group report that you and I talked about at length a few weeks ago, Martin, that sort of indicates the agenda to privatise Australia Post. Every time she raised it, Senator Hume tried to shut down the discussion. Now, these two are government colleagues. They're in the same government. They're coalition colleagues. And instead of taking her senior colleague, and Senator Hume is the senior colleague, instead of taking her position, Senator Mackenzie stood up to her and took her on. And they actually came to blows, and the chairman had to intervene and separate them, verbally, accusing them of bringing the Senate into disrepute. And you think, well, how could that possibly? How can they possibly make it any worse than it already is? But nevertheless, it's really something. This has caused a split in the coalition. All right. So, and that's because the general public, people of DFA watchers that have participated in this, that's because of us. We have created that. Right. We found out the truth and we've stuck to it. And it's redefining politics and political alliances. Right, so this is crucial. Thanks to everyone for their hard work. Now, Martin, I want to tell though before we get to the petition, I want to tell a quick story because this is I just I'm sort of discovering the various details, in stages here. It's like peeling an onion, right? There's different layers of this. And one of the more recent things I've come to appreciate, which will make people understand the watches that Christine Holgate got in trouble for buying, and make people understand who she is, right, and why this is such an important fight to wage, is how close Australia came to losing postal banking services in 2018. Now, this is a big, big deal, because in 2018, Christine Holgate took the job in October 2017. In 2018, the analysts consultants they bring in to look at these things, did the sums and concluded that banking services provided by post offices were costing Australia Post $48 million a year. They were losing $48 million a year providing those services. Now, those are the services that have allowed people especially in regional Australia, in communities that the towns have abandoned. Those are the services that have allowed them to still have access to banking services, right? They've had it through the Australia Post. In other words, those services are crucial. And Australia Post bean counters, or the consultants they brought in, concluded, well, this is costing us money. And the question is what to do. And the recommendation was scrap it. Scrap bank at post. In other words, ditch Australia Post's service of providing banking services to unbanked communities.
And Robbie, sorry, just on that, let's just be clear, right? So in many places, those Australia Post outlets were the last bastion of local banking, because the majors have withdrawn their banks and withdrawn their ATMs. So what we're actually saying is that the costs to Australia Post, which was significant, right, was leading some people in the organisation to say we should just get rid of the whole thing. So never mind the regional communities, never mind the local post offices, right? This is all about making the dollar work, right? But the solution would actually reduce banking services in the regions in the bush to zero.
Well, let's put this map up on the screen, Martin, that you and I have used before. So this is a map. It's actually sourced from the Reserve Bank. This was in the Per Capita is a think tank that did a proposal last year on a postal bank, and this map's taken from their report. But they got it from the Reserve Bank. So all those red dots are post offices around Australia that are more than 50 kilometres from the nearest bank. Right? In other words, people get to bank at those post offices instead of having to drive more than 50 kilometres to another bank. And what that means for those communities is incredible. They, when people come to that town because there's a post office they can bank at, they can go to the coffee shop, they can go to the bakery, they can go to the IGA. They don't have to do, like I'm from Childers in Queensland, which is 45 kilometres from Bundaberg, right? So Childers is about 4,000 people. It's probably more now. I haven't been there for a long time. Lived there for a long time. But it's got banks. It's got 11 pubs. it's got supermarkets and all that. But even with those supermarkets in Childers, it's still a routine where the families in the area, once a week, once a fortnight, make the trek to Bundaberg to go to the bigger shopping centres to do their shopping there. All right, and that's a normal thing. But Childers gets to maintain, it's got enough services that people can do all the regular stuff locally. But in the more remote you get, there's smaller towns where all they have is the post office. And if people had to go 50 kilometres away every time just to get money, they're not going to use the post office, right? And if they're not going to go to the local town. If they don't go to the local town, they don't use the bakery, they don't use the coffee shop, they don't use the local IGA, right? They're not going to do those things, and the town withers and dies, right? Now, here's I'll tell you what I was going to say. I'll tell you about that in a second. So this is what Australia Post was faced with, and I can tell you that when they had this discussion, because you've got a board that's stacked with Liberal Party appointees, and there's been a long-standing just culture of downsizing and cost-cutting Australia Post, right? There was only one person that stood in the way of that recommendation being accepted, and that was Christine Holgate. She just point blank, she was the CEO. It was her call she had to persuade the board, but she's the one who said, no way, no how, we're not going to cut. You're talking about 2,000 communities in Australia would be cut off all banking services if Australia Post made that decision, right? And she said no. And that decision by her led her to get a team of executives, approach the banks, and persuade the banks after a lot of work, a huge effort, persuade the banks to sign up to a deal whereby they agreed to pay $20 million a year as a community representation fee to actually cover the cost of Australia Post serving their customers, the bank's customers, right? That was an incredible... So think about what she did. She saved banking services in 2,000 communities in Australia by doing that. She saved the licensed post offices, and we've talked about that before, who were the ones that most of the losses were coming out of their pockets, right? Angela Cramp did this interview with me, and she's the executive director of licensed post office. She just described it in Technicolor how, Tuesday morning, the local tuck shop from the local school would come with a bag full of coins, right? And Angela's cashier would have to stand with them at the counter for 20 minutes, counting out the money in coins because they didn't even have a cash counting machine, right? And they were getting a fee from the bank for doing that of $1.30 or something. Yet it's costing Angela to pay for that workers for 20 minutes of work, right? That the bank fees coming nowhere close to covering. That's the sort of service that Australia Post officers were providing. It was coming out of their pocket, these losses, right? So the deal with the banks that Christine Holgate and her executive team pulled off, it saved them. It provided this revenue stream, incredible revenue stream for Australia Post in two ways. The fee itself, the $20 million a year from each of the banks except ANZ, was extra revenue for Australia Post. Plus, because banking at post offices became more sophisticated and better, more people were doing it. And of course, on top of the fee, the set fee, the banks were still paying the per transaction amount. And that's increased revenue as well for Australia Post as a whole, right? And the deal with the banks saved Australia Post's bottom line and started to make it profitable again, right? So it saved the whole organisation. That's what she saved through her unique leadership, foresight, skill in this area, and just sense of civic responsibility to Australia as a whole. It wasn't the government that saved 2,000 communities from losing banking services. It wasn't Australia Post board. It wasn't the bean counters. It was this unique chief executive. And it was such a great deal in their exuberance to thank these workers, these executives who had pulled it off, it was not their job. Anyone who makes a comment under this to say, why do we give bonuses to someone for doing their job? You're going to have a fight with me. It was not their job. Their job was to make sure Australia Post does what Australia Post do. This was a special project where they worked with Christine Holgate to take on the most powerful lobby in Australia, and they got them to agree to this deal. They had to work nights, weekends, and holidays to do it. And in recognition of that level of work, she awarded each of them, four of them, a roughly $5,000 watch. And for that, she was crucified 2 years later in Parliament. And nobody in Australia Post or the government attempted to provide the slightest amount of context to the watchers, to even say, okay, you may think this was a bad look, but understand what they were for, the best damn deal in Australia Post history, right? Nobody bothered to do that. Well, I'm doing it. That's why we're on this campaign. This is not about saving a woman because she's a woman or because she's a hard done by CEO. We're talking about a unique situation here with our post office where saboteurs were gutting it, prepared to abandon regional Australia, and one person stood in the way. And that's why this campaign's so important, right? This is not welfare for millionaire executives, let me assure you, right? You're fighting for your nation's future here by participating in this campaign.
There's 2 points, right? The first point is that agenda, basically bringing money back into Australia Post, cut directly across the government's plan to privatise the remnants of Australia Post. So that basically upset a whole bunch of people within the government, right? And of course, the fact that they actually got more money out of the banks upset the banks, right?
Yep.
So basically, you've got these two giants, right, fighting, right, and effectively standing against them. You've got the CEO who's got the vision for Australia Post and its community base and why it's so important, frankly, against those two massive counter forces, right? That's the situation that we're in.
The counter forces that have basically defined Australian political economy for the last 30 years.
Yep.
The privatisers and the bankers. They've run the show. Well, there's political backlash that we're part of, but in this case, it was an extraordinary person who got in the way in terms of Australia Post. So now, so what I'm about to go through, Martin, is I want to just read the petition that we've launched, because now's the time to understand that it is important to focus on what happened to Christine Holgate personally. So know that when we're doing that, it is still part of the bigger picture of what we're fighting for with the whole organisation, etc. But there is an element of this where it's got to be about what happened to Christine Holgate personally, because it's the personal mistreatment she received, which is the tip of the iceberg for the whole story. And so this month, which is the month of the inquiry, the Senate's going to be looking at all the evidence. We have to make sure that they do the right thing, right? So we've launched a petition which is about Christine personally. And so I want to read out the petitions on change.org. And we're going to play a video as well that I'll provide to Martin that we've made up, so that can be circulated on YouTube. Just as a sort of we've branched into YouTube advertising, Martin, where you can pay a little bit of money, and some of you may have seen my mug pop up in YouTube videos you watch, because it's just to get. It's for the purpose of getting the message out, right? So we've done a very short one here of 3 minutes. We'll play that as well. But let me just read the petition that we're asking people to sign. Prime Minister Morrison apologise to Christine Holgate and reinstate her as CEO of Australia Post. The political ambush of Australia Post CEO Christine Holgate that forced her out of Australia Post was a travesty that you must put right. She did not misuse taxpayers' money in the middle of a recession, as dishonest politicians claimed. Rather, the watches she awarded to executives in 2018, in accordance with Australia Post rules and with the approval of its then chair, were appropriate recognition for their exceptional work negotiating the best deal in Australia Post history. The $220 million Bank at Post deal with three of the big four banks made Australia Post profitable and secured the future of postal services in regional Australia by transforming the fortunes of its 2,850 community licensed post offices, small businesses that had faced bankruptcy, who call Christine Holgate, quote, the best CEO Australia Post has ever had. She achieved all this on a much lower salary than her male predecessors. Christine Holgate's exceptional management of our essential national postal service deserved acclaim, not the vicious character assassination to which you and other politicians subjected her for political reasons. The investigation you demanded has exonerated her of any wrongdoing. For the sake of a viable postal service and the community licensed post offices that serve our regional communities, we demand you apologise to Christine Holgate and instruct your ministers to stand down the current chair and order the board to reinstate her as CEO immediately. So that's the petition. So that's on change.org. We'll put the link below. Please, everyone watching this, the first thing you do straight away, click on that, sign it, and then share it as widely as you can. We want this to go viral in the next 2 weeks, right? It will be noticed as it ticks over each time it gets 1,000 signatures, etc. It will be noticed. And that is now we'll be doing other things as well. And, we're escalating on this front, but this is one of those things that you can get it going and it takes on a life of its own. And Martin, you and I did this with the and with John Adams, etc., with the cash ban campaign. We set in train that petition back then. That reached 50,000 signatures, and it gets into that ballpark. It's certainly known, and we have a shorter time frame here to do this. But that's why I'm saying, everyone watch this, please. First thing you do, click on that and sign it. And then while you're at it, look up our website, or we can provide the number. The other thing we're asking people to do is call Scott Morrison's office and just say, reinstate Christine Holgate. So he just keeps getting bombarded nonstop. He's in a world of political pain right now. He's got all sorts of problems he has to deal with. The treatment of women is front and center. Christine Holgate never made it about that. But a lot of people are connecting the two, right? And there is an overlap, frankly. There is an overlap. The bottom line is she's a very successful CEO, full stop, not just a successful female CEO. She did not deserve this, and yet she got monstered by the Prime Minister personally on the biggest possible stage. He just unloaded on her. You'll see in the clip we're going to play, right? It'll just remind you how much he made it about her. In fact, it's so ridiculous, as we talked about. He's now in a position, Martin, where he's trying to he's trying to condemn the most horrible sexual abuse and sexual debauchery in Parliament, and he cannot muster the emotional condemnation to match what he did to Christine Holgate over $5,000 watches. Yep. He was so over the top that day. But if you look at all the things Scott Morrison is dealing with her situation is actually a pretty simple thing to do. The other is a lot more complicated. He needs to have a list of things I've got to solve and say, okay, that's one I've got to solve too. The easiest way to tick that off the list is apologise, reinstate her. You get 1 or 2 hours of bad press. The press has a very tiny attention span. They'll quickly move on to something else, but you can rectify the situation quite easily. But he has to get in his head that the public demands this, and that's where your signature, your sharing it, and your phone call are going to get that through to him.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll certainly play the 3 minutes at the end of this, but just before we do that, it's worth just reflecting on this, that there is already a series of fractions within his parties, right? So you've already highlighted earlier on that there are divisions. So not everybody within his party is actually supporting what was done, which is another reason why he's got to solve this.
Yes. No. And look, so what happens is there's information that comes to us that is sort of on a confidential basis, and you have to keep it that way. But that is true. So all we can do is tell you that is true. The people in right behind Morrison in that party structure, there's a bunch of them that know exactly what we're talking about is right. And what, if you remember, if those who watched the show we did a few weeks ago, I compared it to a chess game, and they're thinking ahead and they're thinking in terms of political rules. For that reason, they haven't done what as much as they could, or if they've done something, they've kept it behind the scenes, maybe, etc. Right? But we've got to get them to realise, forget the game, forget the rules of the game in your head. This has real world consequences here. I can tell you now, if that had have happened in 2018, and 2,000 regional communities were cut off postal service, banking services, right? You wouldn't have a coalition now. No. The Nationals would have completely imploded on the Liberals already, right? We wouldn't have that kind of government, and this would be, this has real world consequences. Plus, forget the economic carnage out in regional Australia. So that's what we got to get through to them, so they realise, I'm in a position to do something. I see the consequences. I see the consequences of inaction. It looks like if I do something now, I actually may be popular because I'm getting all this blowback from the public, thanks to people acting on conversations like this. And then, things can happen behind the scenes, and then maybe publicly, and we can solve this problem. Yeah,
well, Robbie, I appreciate your time today, and we will now play the advert. And it's really very powerful, so well done for producing it. And folks, once you've seen the advert, go directly across to change.org, sign that petition.
It's time for Prime Minister Scott Morrison to man up and apologise to Christine Holgate and reinstate her as CEO of Australia Post. I'm Robbie Barwick of the Citizens Party. Please sign our petition demanding that Scott Morrison publicly apologise and reinstate her as CEO. Christine Holgate has been exonerated by the government's own investigation. The report done by the Maddox law firm clearly says There is no indication of dishonesty, fraud, corruption or intentional misuse of Australia Post funds by any individual involved in the matters relating to the purchase and gifting of the Cartier watches. What's more, whereas the previous CEO Ahmed Fahour had racked up huge losses at Australia Post, Christine Holgate restored the business to profitability. Crucially, this included the small business community licensed post offices. Recently, we've seen the Prime Minister apologise to News Corp. Morrison had falsely claimed News Corp had its own sex scandal. This made headlines around the world. In fact, the Prime Minister even apologised on the floor of Parliament.
I have apologised unreservedly for what I did in bringing that matter into that press conference and to raising something I should never have raised.
Speaking of shabby and insensitive treatment of women, what about Christine Holgate? Last October, Morrison slammed Ms Holgate on the floor of Parliament.
I was appalled. It's disgraceful. The Chief Executive should stand aside immediately. So appalled and shocked was I by that behaviour. She's been instructed to stand aside, and if she doesn't wish to do that, Mr Speaker, she can go.
It turns out Scott Morrison was completely wrong. Indeed, it is Morrison's behaviour which is shocking and appalling. Morrison's own investigation has proven it. Okay, as Morrison himself said, blokes don't get it right all the time. It's long past time to correct this egregious mistake. We've created a petition on change.org entitled Prime Minister Scott Morrison apologise to Christine Holgate and reinstate her as CEO of Australia Post. A blameless woman was slandered and vilified by the Prime Minister. Not only does she deserve to have her good name cleared, but this is also vital for the good of the nation. A healthy postal service is critical to our ability to function as a society. This is so urgent that I ask you to please take a moment right now. Click on the link you see on the screen. Add your name to the petition demanding that Scott Morrison apologise and reinstate Christine Holgate, and share the petition as widely as you can.